what Jesus is saying about loving your enemies is God, but then at the same time, Old Testament, when there is extreme violence, or hey, I am going to destroy this city, this town, how is that consistent?
God's anger at sin is like a parent's anger would be at his kid's cancer. He doesn't hate the kid, he hates the cancer.
I could see God enacting wrath and judgment on sinful, wicked people that have been given tons of opportunity. But what about children? Those are tough because, again, now you're talking about legitimate innocence.
I'm probably mid-wrestle with that one, where it's like, I don't know enough to be like, hey, this is exactly why.
If you're only looking at the Old Testament and you're saying, like, what's up with that? You've got to read it in balance with the New Testament of, like, the very same God of wrath suffered the God of wrath for us.
And we've gotten into some pretty good topics
Yeah, we have.
the past 3 episodes through science, faith.
We figured it all out.
We figured it out.
Nice.
We solved it with the
All
Bible, with Jesus.
All knowledge has ended right now.
Here it is.
Excellent.
So John is going to conclude the question on this topic.
Not even close.
So we're getting in a pretty big one right now. The title of this one is "Did God Change, and Why is the Old Testament so violent?" And we're going to get into stuff like, hey, why did God flood the earth? Why did he reset the earth? And why did it seem like he killed so many people, women, children? There's so much war, atrocities, and did he change? Because the reality is we look at Jesus, and it really seems like he's pacifist, all about peace, and wouldn't hurt anyone other than maybe flipping a few tables. Doesn't seem like he wants to hurt anyone. But then God in the Old Testament, seems harsh, really harsh. And so he wants to kick us off. Did God change, and why is God in the Old Testament so?
No, I definitely want to say, coming into this, we're joking because we've enjoyed each other's company and kind of talking about a bunch of different things, but definitely want to say this is probably gonna be the hardest of all of them, just because I don't think there is a real super satisfying answer where you can walk away from this and be like, oh, answer, check, and move on. And if you do feel like that, then you really don't appreciate the subject, for sure.
Permission to wrestle today.
Yeah.
Please, if you're listening to this, give yourself permission to do that. I don't think you'll do yourself justice, or even God justice, if you're not like, hey, help me make sense of this.
100%.
And there may be a part of after when we're done with this that still feels somewhat unresolved, and that's okay. We're gonna try to close as much as I can.
So we're basically saying we have no answers for you.
That's the end of the podcast.
No. What we're saying is that just because you don't have a satisfactory answer, doesn't mean there's not one, or it doesn't invalidate the devotion to God because of all the other things we know about him. You know what I mean? So that the things that we talk about in here, and I think we're going to handle a lot of stuff that's going to be very satisfying. And I do think, I don't want anybody to be like, well, I'm done. But we are going to cover a lot of facts here, a lot of things that we can take away from this. But just because you don't have everything to be able to tie up in a neat little bow and offer to somebody doesn't mean that God isn't worth the effort. And we're forgetting that we're stuck in time, that there will be a time when we're able to see God face to face and be blown away by what we realized then, in the same way that, when we became adult children of our parents, we appreciated them better. When we were kids, there were times we were like, how can he do this to me? I hate him, whatever. So there's a certain factor of we're stuck in our own humanity right now. And that maybe that's part of what the journey of faith is really all about.
It's good. So how do we even begin to peel this back?
Yeah, just start with a good question. What's one we want to launch into?
Well, I mean, I'd love to just start with the main question and break it down how you need to. But someone's asking, hey, did God change? Is God different? When you look at Jesus in the New Testament, because he is God, looks different than the Old. So let's just answer that. Did God change?
I mean, in the Old Testament, God comes out and says, I think it's Malachi 3:6 says, and Lord, I don't change. Okay, so that's part of the immutability of God saying, okay, well, then he's not going to change from one day to the next. And that gives us some safety context of like, okay, he's not just going to change his mind on us. In Hebrews 13:8, it says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So Old and New Testament, it talks about this sense of not changing. So, I mean, I think we start at least with the Bible, acknowledging that. So, I don't know.
And I'd say too, like, it's so hard for us to comprehend God, right? We're never going to be able to put God in a box. And so I think the temptation that we bump into is, say if God's like a diamond and there's all these sides and edges to him, we'll read a passage and we'll get super hyper fixated on just one aspect of him. Hey, he's loving. Hey, he's compassionate. Hey, he's all knowing. And then we'll bump into things like he's just, and we'll be like, oh, like, which one is he? Sometimes
Mhm.
we'll think they're contradictions
Mhm.
as opposed to like different edges of the same structure.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we see in the Bible all the time. Like we see different aspects of God. We're not going to figure all of him out, but we can at least hold both of them at the same time and trust, hey, I don't know everything, but you're saying this is who you are. And I think Old Testament God, we see a lot more of the side of him that's more setting up the stage for, hey, there's a world that's wrecked by sin. There's evil, and God's a God that does something with that evil. He's got to find a solution to the evil to get to us, right? To create a relationship with us, and that sets up Jesus. But we also see a side to him that sometimes just says, hey, enough is enough when it comes to evil, and he has to intervene. And that for us sometimes is how we need to make sense of it.
Dude, okay, so you're saying this, and I'm totally thinking, and this wasn't even in my head like 20 minutes ago, or even 20 seconds ago. Um, took a bunch of young adults on a mission trip. Okay, and we went to shoot. Where were we? We were in Belize. Okay, so like must be nice, right? So we're in Belize, and it's like Belize is like one of the most sought after spots for like diving and snorkeling and stuff like that. We weren't going for that, but it actually turned out to be kind of almost the opposite of what you usually go there for. We were working with kids that were children of like drug runners,
Oh, wow.
gang members, stuff like that. And we thought, oh, okay, it's Belize. How hard can this be? And so we're on this campus. There was this guy who runs this mission, and we were going to work with kids during the day and then do stuff like in the city at night. And so our thing was kind of actually like a vacation Bible school during the day. And vacation Bible school where it's like, hey, everybody follow me. And they're all like, yeah. And you got like prizes you can give out and games you can play. And it's just a lot of fun. So we're all geared up for that. We've got all the days mapped out, everything planned out. And these kids showed up. It was a nightmare because you had like 2/3 of them that were just completely unruly, like wild animals. Okay. And 1/3 of them that were really nice, they're really, really good. And so this is why what you just said made me think of this. We took a trip where we said, okay, well, let's load up the buses. Let's see if the first day was a disaster. Okay, so we're like, why don't we try? We'll take them to the ocean and we'll do these games. We'll do all this kind of stuff.
What could go wrong?
Oh my gosh! On like the bus ride, they're throwing stuff out of the window.
Ooh.
We go to this park, which is like the beach, and there's this house. I don't know, like almost like a lifeguard station or something like that. We weren't even there 30 seconds, and there's kids on the roof.
Oh my!
They're like peeing off the side of the roof. They're throwing stuff around. Someone's getting ready to throw somebody off the roof. Like it was wild, like completely crazy. And I'm thinking, what the heck am I going to do? And so we're trying to individually like talk with these, hey, you can't do that. You can't do this. Hey, we have rules. We have, a schedule, and like trying the best we can. We got teachers on this thing giving us their best, like how do we deal with these kids? We get them back to campus. We're doing stuff. I look over. I see Wendy Stivers. She was on this trip. She was one of the ladies that came on this trip. Great woman of God. Great prayer warrior. Amazing. I look over and I see her coming in the door. And it looks like she's slipping and falling. She's getting pushed over. She's getting like tackled by the kids.
Wow.
Not like, we love you, but like, ah, and they're just like destroying her.
Causing destruction.
Like, it's horrible. This is like Hades. Okay. And I'm like, what do we do? And so man down, Wendy Stivers is on the floor. And they see now, oh, we can defeat them. Okay. So it's like,
there are more of us than them.
yeah, totally. What was that? Lord of the Flies. It's just like, isn't that, that book where Lord of the Flies, where they like,
they go to the island.
Yeah.
And they
like,
have to like,
yeah.
they're like savage with
Yeah.
each other. Yeah.
Yep.
This is what it's becoming. It's a Lord of the Flies situation.
Oh my gosh.
And it's increasing by the minute. Like, I've got to do something. So Evil John came out. And it wasn't Evil John. It was like Stern John.
Yeah.
I was just like, that's it. Everybody sit down like that. And so I had everybody sit down. And even the bad kids were still kind of looking at me like, oh, he's not serious. I'm like, I'm serious. Sit down. Heads down. Everybody, heads down for 10 minutes.
It's down.
I said everybody put
Was
their
this a
heads down.
hostage situation? Or
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was like, everybody, heads down. Even the people on the team were looking at me like, he's lost it.
Wow.
But that's all I could think of at that moment was just like, somebody's got to take charge. Somebody's got to remind the people that like, this isn't what we're doing. Okay. So again, I took a few minutes while it was quiet. I said, we just need order. And they agreed. They're like, yeah, we needed order somehow. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to finish out the day. We're going to reconvene. We're going to come up with a totally different plan on this. So check this out. We talked about it, and I said, I know this is horrible, but we've got 1/3 of these kids that are like good and nice. Tomorrow, 2/3 of them are staying here, and 1/3 of them get to go to the beach, and you can run the entire program and have an awesome day. I said, who wants to join me with the bad kids? Not everybody wanted to.
Yeah.
But that next day was really hard with the bad kids. But I felt so good about the good kids. They came back and they had papers that they were drawing, all these things. They learned something. They were like, thank you so much. This was such a great day. They gave hugs to everybody. They're on the way out. The evil kids were just like, like destroying each other. And they're not evil. And I don't want to insinuate, that people are inherently evil.
Yeah.
But the Bible does talk about how we, because of sin, we are prone to evil, and
so is the Old Testament like one big VBS?
pretty much.
And God has to have us sit down.
And I don't even know where this is headed, but I just know, I identified with what you were saying. Is like, is it possible that there are times where God sees sin and it's just like, I got to deal with something here?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you're still John, like in both of those aspects.
Right.
When you freaked out on the kids, but also John that was having fun playing
Yeah.
with the kids coloring. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And because I cranked down on 2/3 of them, 1/3 were able to enjoy it.
Yeah. I think it's also helpful too, like we talk about that dichotomy, right? To see like what God says about himself even and how that even exists. And so Exodus 34, he's talking to Moses and he's like, hey, he gives his personal name Yahweh, which is also unheard of for God to do that.
Yeah.
But then he gives a ton of descriptors. I just want to read that quick because I think that'll set some of the stage too. Because even God, as he's describing himself, like I'm this, but I'm also this.
Yep.
And so this is Exodus 34. This is verses 5 to 8. And it says, then the Lord came down in a cloud and stood there with him. And he called out his own name, Yahweh. The Lord passed in front of Moses, calling out Yahweh, the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish the unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin. And here he goes. But I do not excuse the guilty. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children and grandchildren, and the entire family is affected, even children in the 3rd and 4th generations. And it says Moses immediately threw himself to the ground and worshiped. And so, like, probably a ton more to unpack there. It's made another podcast. But even God, as he's describing who he is in Moses, is like, I'm merciful and I'm good, but also like I do something with evil. I respond to evil in a way where I can be both these things at the same time.
And the temptation is to be like, well, let's just read the New Testament. You know what I mean? And when you think of like the flood, people died. You know what I mean? Lots of people died. And then Sodom and Gomorrah, people died. God was responsible for these people dying. The plagues, firstborn, they weren't involved in this. They died. And so it's like acknowledging Uzzah, when he was, or is it Uzzah, they were moving the ark, right? And the cart was like, oh, wait, it's unstable. I want to stop the ark from moving. But they said, don't touch the ark. But he just kind of did this to the ark, and then he gets struck down. Like God kills him. Or like, is it in Leviticus or Exodus? No, it's Deuteronomy where they talk about disobedient children. Stone them. If they are disobedient, bring them to the elders. If they're still disobedient, then you should stone them. Kill them. It's like, whoa, what are we talking about here? So it's like we've got to hold those two things in tension. We can't just like pretend that it doesn't happen and that God wasn't behind some of that.
Yeah. And I mean I think that's where some confusion starts to build up, because I think about, so the Old Testament, there's some of that.
Yeah.
It's like you're stoning kids, or your people are dying for what probably my kids do every single day. In my house, just doing something dumb, throwing things across the house.
Is it bad to like just be like, well, there are times with some of my kids that they did stuff. I was like,
did they need a stoning?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Horrible.
So like, seriously, I look at some of that stuff and I think like, man, I mean, my kids are wild sometimes. Like were they hitting the threshold of when kids needed to be stoned in the Old Testament?
Well, no. Okay, so yeah, we probably should put that in context. You're talking about somebody who's disobedient, and disobedient today and disobedient back then is a very, very different thing. Disobedient was like they were completely removing themselves from the rhythm of the community. they were either getting drunk or doing or abusing other people or
Mm.
not even caring about how this affected the family and a family name. And it talks about how bringing them to the elders that they still don't listen, so it was a major thing. It wasn't just like they were on the iPad too long,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it wasn't something like that.
Yeah.
But see, the thing is, we listen to this stuff. We talk about the flood, we talk about Uzzah, you talk about all these different things, and we think like, man, that's hard to stomach. But the people back then had the same reaction. You have Moses saying, whoa, 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 God, no, no, no. God's like, you know what? I'm tired of these people. Maybe we ought to just get rid of them, which a holy God has the right to consider. And Moses is like, no, 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 you don't have to do that. That's overkill. Okay, you don't have to do that. Abraham, same way.
Mm.
You're gonna destroy Sodom. It was Sodom and Gomorrah where he
Yeah.
questions
I
them.
think so.
Yeah. But
And
he
does he
wanted-
start at 50?
I
and
can't
then he
remember
goes
what
to
he starts
40?
at, but he rolls down to 1.
10.
10,
Wasn't
is
it 10? Was it 1?
I'm not
I
sure.
think it was 1 at
Jamie?
some point.
Somebody look
Jamie,
up.
help.
Yeah. So the idea, though, there is that even the people back then were questioning it.
Mm.
So I think that adds a layer of authenticity to it. That even they were like, "Whoa, this seems a little too much."
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so again, like almost like people were resisting
Mm.
God's wrath.
Mhm.
They're saying like, hey, that they were almost like noticing, like, hey, that seems a little harsh.
Yeah.
Because then again, I would think about Jesus, who is God,
Mhm.
and so he's teaching, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, like
Mhm.
almost like this sense of you might have to put up with a lot. Like you
Mhm.
need to like actually be prayerful of them, not
Mhm.
necessarily exact wrath on them.
And again, this is an editorial or redactive type of moment to say, if you're trying to create a story that you're going to sell to a bunch of people, and like,
Mhm.
we're going to make up this imaginary God, we
Yeah.
want everybody to believe in this. This wouldn't be in it.
Yeah.
You would have said, we just get rid of that because that's really hard to stomach.
Mhm.
And so yeah, how maybe say more about that? Like, how do we make sense of something like that? Like, does that mean that what Jesus is saying about loving your enemies is God, but then at the same time, Old Testament, when there is extreme violence, or hey,
Mhm.
I am gonna just destroy this city, this town. How is that consistent?
Mm.
This is where,
Yeah, we both look at each other.
this is going to be the podcast. Like, I don't want to say
I don't know.
anything.
You wanna go
You
first?
want to say something?
I would say, we got a snapshot of Jesus' life here. Right? Obviously, changed the whole world. I would be careful for us not to just, almost like I was talking about earlier, just hyperfixate on just that side of Jesus too. Because the Jesus we see coming back in Revelation is very different.
That's good.
Like he's done washing feet at that point. Like he's here
And
to.
Jesus cursed the fig tree, right? Was it a fig tree?
I think it was. Yeah, he's like, you're done. Like no more,
Yeah.
Branch, yeah.
And
no
it's kinda
more,
like,
no more
whoa,
fruit.
Wait, what? Why?
Yeah.
Getting a little angry
So
here.
even stuff like that, human things like that, it's like sides of him we wouldn't really associate with Jesus.
Yeah.
But he's like, yeah, ticked off by the tree and killed the
So
tree.
this reminds me of a story. I was talking to a guy. We were in a truck. We were on our way to the airport in Morocco, and he was Arabic, and we were speaking in French. So like, it was interesting because I was he spoke pretty quickly, but I was able to follow him. We were going back and forth, and I was like, man, this is a great opportunity to ask a Muslim about Islam. And I'm like, so, tell me more about Muhammad. And he's telling me about Muhammad. Tell me more about this. And then he mentioned something about heaven. I'm like, yeah, so what do you need to do to get into heaven? And he mentions like the 5 things that you need to do to get into heaven, the standard 5, like the Shahada, prayers, giving to the poor, making your Hajj, the trip to Mecca. He goes through all of them. And I was like, so you get into heaven then? And he goes, well, maybe. And I was like, wait, what? He goes, well, I mean, it's up to God. I was like, so you don't know if you make it into heaven? He's just like, no, he's God. Like, it's up to him. I was like, wait a second. So if I get into heaven, can I stay in heaven? He's like, maybe. I was like, wait, you're saying I can't even have eternal security, like in heaven? And he kept looking at me so strange, like, he's God. I was like, so he can kick me out for any reason? He's like, yeah, he's God. And it was funny because I mentioned to him, I was like, boy, that's different. And he goes, why? And I mentioned about grace. And I kind of talked through the whole thing. I was witnessing to him. It was like illegal at the time. But then he goes like this. He goes, let's change the subject. As soon as I had mentioned about Jesus. And I always wondered, like, what did he mean by that? Like, let's change the subject. I don't want to hear anymore. You're an idiot. Or like, this is illegal, what you're doing. You're sharing Christ with me. Or like, that is so far off base of who God really is. I'm just going to stop you right now and just save you from looking stupid. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like, do we need a little bit more of that sense of like, dude, he's God. And so you can't just invalidate your belief in something because you don't like it or you don't agree with it.
You don't understand it.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of the specific instances then in the Old Testament where God is violent and just see if we can just wrestle with him a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know we might not get a nice clean answer, but maybe we can just kind of dig into it. And one of them being like the Canaanite genocide, right? Deuteronomy 20, where God commands Israel to completely destroy entire cities, men, women, children. So maybe help us with context there, right? Because sometimes we might hear like headlines.
Yeah.
Like, here's the headline. And you kind of read that, you read the snippet, but is there more that we should understand about this?
You just read Paul Copen's book, right?
So I listened to him talk a little bit about it and kind of.
Is it Paul? Paul Copen?
Yeah, Paul Copen.
Yeah.
So yeah, he wrote a book. It's called "Is God a Moral Monster?"
That's a great title.
Yeah, like
we should repeat that. Is God a moral monster?
Wow.
And that even just goes to like the wrestle, right? Talk about like you can what you just said. Look at the headlines and be like, I don't know, like maybe, like I just read this. How do I make sense of that?
Yeah.
And so like again, this is how he understands it, and I'm sure there's a ton of different takes on this, right? But this helped me make sense of that wrestle a ton. And so he talked about a bunch of different things. You talked about context. That was like a big one for him because he really references. I mean, I think we've already talked about in this podcast how the Bible has different forms of literature in it, right? And so sometimes it's like it's poetry. Sometimes it's like, well, it's kind of a biography of people who are eyewitnesses to Jesus, and this one's history. And so it's really helpful to know what you're looking at in the Bible. And it's additionally helpful to know, after I know what I'm looking at in the Bible, how do I compare that to what else was written in that genre of that day? And so when we're looking at Deuteronomy, it's like, all right, that's like historical, particularly in this case, like military history. And he noticed this theme where as he looked at some of the phrases in the Bible and as he looked at like other historical contexts, there tends to be, and it's kind of like when you hear about it, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. It's like a bunch of guys. But like, there's almost this like bravado, like hyperbole, like, hey, when we crushed them, we left nobody left. Like, similar to like sort of what we do with sports. Like, dude, the Phillies crushed the Dodgers.
Destroyed them.
Like the Eagles, like blew the Chiefs to smithereens, like stuff like that. None of us read those headlines. We're like, we should check up on them in the hospital. Like we're like, no, like it was hyperbole.
Yeah, he hit that home run a mile long.
Yeah.
It's like,
none of us are like, well. So there's almost this element of that where they would almost just overplay what they had done. Again, not like excusing the fact like this is war and horrific, but not down to like the last man, right? Not complete annihilation or genocide.
Hey, total nerd note on that. Okay, you know when you say someone was decimated or they were decimated, that actually means made or it was actually destroyed 1/10. Isn't that funny?
Wow.
When you decimate something, you don't destroy it. You're actually only taking 1/10 of it away. Isn't that funny?
That doesn't seem like that much.
I know, it really doesn't.
We talk about that all the time. We're like, man, you was decimated. And in my head, I'm like, 1/10, pretty weak.
That's like twisting my ankle. Like most of me's good, but I'm just.
But you're saying like destroyed. You were completely wiped off the face of the earth. Yeah.
Like even so an example outside of the Bible, they have a writing from a Moabite king, and he's talking about how they beat Israel in this battle, and he even says like Israel is no more. Well, like clearly they are. Like they're like around today. The whole rest of the Bible's about them. Yeah. But like that's just how they kind of talked about it. And
so you're saying the Bible basically it records the sayings of the day in a sense. Like it's operating within the language of the day, and it's not something that's overarching. Like okay, well they completely wiped out, but it's like in a hyperbolic way saying we achieved the mission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Kind of a snapshot of hey, this is how they would talk at the time. He also talks a ton about which. Sometimes I'm like, I wish I came up with this, right? Just like, hey, just keep reading, essentially, is some of the ways he just talks about where it's like, all right, so you have this hyperbole, and if that's true, if you just keep reading through the story, you should find instances of where it's like, oh, there's additional commands afterwards that talks about survivors, or like, hey, don't marry with them, and things like that. And we actually see that, and I can read some of them, but like, if you just keep reading, you see that like, there'll be like a verse that talks about, hey, we destroyed everybody. And then just a little bit later, be like, God will be like, well, don't intermarry with
people
them
that are left behind.
And you're like, wait a minute, which one is it?
I thought there were nobody left behind.
And so I'm just going to read like a couple of them.
And they got to be some real gems that are left behind.
And so this is Joshua, this is Joshua 10:40 says, so Joshua conquered the whole region, the kings and the people of the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, and the mountain slopes. He completely destroyed, there you go, everyone in the land, leaving no survivors, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. And then if you go to the next book, this is Judges, chapter 1. It's literally the first 3 verses. It says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, which tribe should go first to attack the Canaanites? Like, they're still out there. We want to fight them. The Lord answered Judah, for I have given them the land, or victory over the land. And it says that they got ready. The men of Judah, here we go. The men of Judah said to their relatives from the tribe of Simeon, join us in the fight against the Canaanites living in the territory allotted to us. Then we will help you conquer your territory. I think my favorite one, though, it's like the same 5 chunks of verses. This is Deuteronomy chapter 7. And this is the one where I believe he's pretty much tells them, hey, like, go kill everybody. And then, hey, don't marry them. And so this one has a bunch of names of the people that I'm going to butcher. So just calling that out right now.
You got to do your best. Right?
Yeah, do my best. Here we go. Here we go. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are about to enter and occupy, he will clear away many nations ahead of you. Here we go. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites.
Hey, great.
I believed you.
Yeah,
I know, yeah, confidence. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous than you. When the Lord your God hands these nations over to you, and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. There it is, completely destroy. Make no treaties with them and show them no mercy. Here we go. Verse 3. You must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods.
Yeah, who's there to marry if they're all gone?
Yeah.
Right.
And so part of what Copen just says is, you're like, hey, like, just keep reading. There's this theme of like, there's a command or a phrase that mentions that they completely destroyed everything or everybody. And then normally not long afterward, there's a command that's like, hey, be very careful around the survivors. Don't marry them, tear down their altars, do all these things.
So some people may say, well, then God's lying. Or, God's not telling the full truth. But I think you got to not rest there. You got to go further and be like, God's speaking the language. He's relating to the people. And the things are being recorded in such a way of how they would have recorded it back then.
Yeah.
And it just sounds weird to us. Yeah.
He also, probably like the final piece, I think that really helped me. He talked about the actual wording of utterly destroyed too. Like, this is where I phone a friend. You want to say it? Harem? Harem. You got to get like some phlegm in there. Herem. Yeah, we read it a lot when we're looking at the translations that we just read of like utterly destroyed. And so like it can mean destroyed, but oftentimes more what it meant was a way of God reclaiming wholly what was his. Like, and so he's like cutting away everything that's not his and reclaiming it. There's even verses where I think it's Jeremiah 25 where he talks about hareming the tribe of Judah, and he doesn't destroy them, but he's like, it's almost an identity thing. It's like, I got to reclaim what's mine. And so we see this a lot here, more of God's not so much waging war on people, but even like ideology. Talking about like, hey, if Israel is my people, and there are these competing ideologies around, after we conquer those people, we got to make sure that we do away with those things.
And the whole idea of harem is that like it's through fire that it's burned up, and now it's claimed by God.
Yeah.
And so, there are times where they talk about something that seems like, whoa, that's a little too much.
Intense.
But like what you're saying with like, what tribe was it again? That was
Judah.
Yeah. So obviously he's not burning the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. And so I don't know, even like modern day context, it's like when you look back at World War II, right? Like, hey, so what the Nazis did, like that's ethnic cleansing, like 6 million Jews dead. Like, that's why we went to war, stuff like that. Very different than what we did with the Nazi party and the Germans, right? Again, war is horrific, but like Allies, U.S. forces defeated the Nazis, did a lot of honestly the same things. Where it's like swastikas are gone, ideology's gone, like we're getting rid of all of that stuff.
Wiping it out.
But like the German people are fine otherwise. And so there's a very big difference between those two things. Again, both war, both horrific, but one is saying, hey, the problem is that you're a certain people group. The other one's like, no, the problem's an ideology that almost like cancer has like just worked its way tumorously into the society, and we've got to cut it out.
Yeah, it's like mold. Yeah. And not the people were mold. And most of the people that were innocents left the cities. They escaped into the hills. And so when you took the city, the people that were left behind were mostly combatants. So it's not this image of like there's this plain of 3 million people that are getting wiped out. It's not like a Hollywood type of thing. You're talking about a very small concentration of people. And it seems like all throughout the ancient Near East, they would inflate those numbers and just talk about them like, man, we destroyed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And it's not like it's lying. It's weird for our ears. It's a way of saying like, look how much adversity we overcame. It's like, I talked about this before. What's his name? Zacchaeus.
Yep.
Zacchaeus meets Jesus, gets changed, has him to dinner, and he's like, I'm a changed man. I'm going to pay back everybody 4 times the amount. Everybody reading that from the Middle East goes like, oh, okay, we're not lining up for 4 times the amount that we were charged. We understand this is hyperbole. This is him saying, I'm a changed man. And it's just foreign to our ears to hear those inflated numbers.
Yeah.
Up there with a calculator, like,
Yeah.
how much is it?
All right then. So
And I think that's probably, I'm sure people feel frustrated towards that complexity because it feels like, shouldn't the Bible
yeah.
be somewhat more approachable?
Right.
Like, if I like, why do I got to read through everything? Like, maybe that's why hey, if I just take everything literal, it at least makes that simple. Where it's like, at least I just know it is what it is. And what I'm hearing you guys say is like, it feels like it's introducing a complexity where I'm reading, and we are reading ancient text.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
maybe that's par for the course, but it feels almost like a juke. Like, here's what the Bible says. Oh, no, but didn't mean that.
Yeah.
Right? Like go destroy them. It's like, oh, no, but like, now that you're upset
Not all
about
of
it,
them.
that's not really what it meant.
Well, we also got to remember this too. There's another, like, all these are all facets to that one, like, oh, how do we explain this? So the other facet is that many of these places that the Lord told Israel to go into were pretty bad, and I'm not, you should not have the image of like, they just went into this valley where people were churning butter and, like, and not that they were like super evil drug dealers and, like serial rapists or anything like that. But they did, their forms of worship were horrible. Like the Ammonites worshipped Molech. It was the Moabites that worshiped Chemosh. And both of these gods, in some form, had infant sacrifice.
Oh, wow.
And like this, that's heinous. You take a figurine of a god that has arms like this, and you heat up the arm area to where it glows red, and you place the baby inside of it, or then you put them in an urn and then burn it. So they've discovered these valleys of like infant bones inside these little like ossuaries. That kind of stuff was what God mentions. He's like, I've seen the sins of these people, and it almost there's certain verbiage that indicates that God was trying to reach them. Or God was trying to like either send, like Jonah, send people to say, hey, turn back from this, repent. And they don't. And so I think there's a point, you might even have it on your paper over there, but it's like 400 years I've put up with this, and now it's reached its max, and I'm ready to pull the trigger on this. I mean, these were civilizations that had idolatry. And dude, the idolatry was weird, okay? And it's weird to us, but there was ritual prostitution. So you'd have men and women that would like kind of hang out in these temples. And so it's Ashtaroth and Baal. There's like Ishtar, Astarte, or kind of like different forms of them. All throughout the ancient Near East, you had these connections where in a temple, you would have a prostitute, either male or female, which would represent the divinity. And so Astarte or Ashtaroth would be like the female, and she would take on almost like a possession of that deity. And you could go in, pay your dues, you'd pay for this experience, and have a sexual experience with this prostitute. And so there were different ways that it was structured. There would be a priest, so weird, but there would be a priest who would instruct you on what to do during this whole thing. And the idea was that you were going to bring about fertility, you're going to bring about great crops, you're going to help rainfall. This was how you made contact with the divine. And so not only was it a kind of a weird sexual thing, because these women, not many men, there were some men that did this, but it was majority women. And when the women did it, they were looked up to. They were kind of seen as like, oh, wow, they have a special status in your mind only. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like lip service was paid, like, oh, thank you for your service. But they were often mistreated. They were not given a whole lot of rights, as you can expect. You know what I mean? Like they're prostitutes in a sense. And even though it was a ritual form of it, by lip service, it was like, thanks for doing what you do. But it was a miserable life. And you felt used. And what happens when you have lost your beauty? So are people going to want to pay to go with someone who's 60 years old, 70 years old? No, it's not going to happen. So you were worn out and you were cast aside. So you had this kind of society that in many ways, almost like what we do with our youth and beauty in our culture, we cast aside these people. And it's almost like God saying, like, look, I don't want you to do that. They mistreated the poor. They mistreated orphans, widows, slaves. there was torture of people that were held from military campaigns. So like all of these societies were brutal and they didn't have God's law. And that's why, like, when you read through Leviticus, when you read through Deuteronomy, when you read through the law that's given in Exodus, there are so many limitations that God brings on the Israelites in certain areas. It just seemed weird to us. Like, why would God make that law? Because the surrounding cultures were doing these things that were just horrible to each other. And so that's why the Jews loved the law, because the law gave them freedom. It also gave them, like, okay, if somebody hurts me, I have a law that I can refer to get justice. But it also prescribed a way that was different than the nations and that we didn't do something like that. Does that make sense? I mean, God was definitely seeing, he was keeping score, and he's like, okay, we're going to have to get rid of this way of life. That we can't do this anymore.
I've got your verse, Genesis 15:16. Yeah, after 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction.
Yep.
Almost like this threshold God has
Yeah.
before he intervenes.
So some of what we've covered so far is like got like legit judgment on people who have been doing very evil things, sometimes for a long time.
Yeah.
And God's kind of like ready to enact that judgment on them. Some of it is hyperbole, war talk, where probably wasn't literally everyone, but they're just using terms to say, like, destroy them, basically, like take away their will, take away like
it doesn't explain all of it, but it helps to, like, okay, I get a better perspective on it.
But so I mean, I think we're covering certain pockets of this so far, right? And we're getting some of that war stuff, some of those like big, that I could see the path to that on some of those big war ones. And so we still have some others that start to get a little.
But wait, so on the last thing before we go into the next thing here is God's anger at sin is like God, like a parent's anger would be at his kid's cancer. So he doesn't hate the kid, he hates the cancer. And so it's just that anger. There was a quote out there that was like, God can't be good if he's not angry at sin. And that is really what fuels a lot of this. And think about this. So God is talking about the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, all these different people that are doing these things that are wicked, that are like horrible, that we would all be like, whoa, you shouldn't do that. And it's mitigated by the fact that, in Israel, the law is saying we're not going to live like that, And then think about this. When the Israelites don't even live up to the law anymore and they start taking on some of the characteristics or some of the worship styles, the idolatry of Baal and Ashtoreth and the rest of it, then God uses Babylon to chastise them. So think about that for a minute. It's like reversed. Is it possible, when you think through like the Assyrians and the Babylonians that came in and took over Israel, it's because Israel sinned. So it's not so much that God is inspiring genocide. There was a time in which even the Assyrians and Babylonians came in and destroyed Jerusalem, and destroyed the Jews because they were sinning. And so God is angry at sin. God's anger at sin is not the opposite of love. It's the expression of love. It's like, look, I've created this thing. I've made all of this for you. It's beautiful. It's perfect. It's like everything I've done is a work of art. And somebody has come by with spray paint and spray painted over everything. Sin has come by and hacked it to pieces. So I'm angry at that person. And I want to go through and I want to stop that person from doing that thing. And so sometimes when whole nations embrace evil and when they do things that are not of God, God's got to show his anger at that sin.
And so I feel like that makes sense in terms of how I could see God getting there, saying like, hey, I hate sin, so I'm going to deal with this. So, and I don't want to keep going in circles. So if we already answered what we needed to answer, then we can move on. But I think about, we have baptisms at our church. People step into the water and they tell stories of like, you don't even want to know who I was before I found Jesus. You don't want to know what I've done. I remember standing next to a guy who he was a professional boxer turned criminal and arms all cut up. He said the things that I've done to people and how I've hurt people, you wouldn't even want to know me. And here he is standing in the water, finds Jesus, and has this transformative experience and like changes his life. And so I guess sometimes that disconnect between, again, Old and New Testament can be with those things where it feels like New Testament's all about come find Jesus, experience life change, no matter how far gone you are. Yet Old Testament, it's like, well, what about those people? Like, were they too far gone? So is that a contradiction? We're like, no, but some people are actually too far gone. And so God said, I'm actually just going to wipe them out. Like, instead of giving them an opportunity to turn to me, or I don't know, Israelites go in and capture them and teach them about God, show them where they're wrong, and then turn to them. Did those chances already happen? Is that like, how do we, and again, maybe there's not an answer to this, but how do we make sense of some of those seemingly contradictions?
I think the most straightforward and probably the simplest way to like put handles on it and take it somewhere is that in order to get to the baptism moment where a person can say, I'm putting my trust in Jesus, in order to have a Jesus, you've got to have an Israel that lives at the nexus of the ancient world. And that ancient world, right where Israel is, you've got one highway going this way. It's the King's Highway. Goes up to Assyria, goes over to Egypt. The other one goes over to Persia. That where God puts Israel is at the nexus of the ancient world. And so what's fascinating is you think through geopolitically, developmentally over the next several hundred years, that place is exactly where, if you wanted to influence all of Western society, and even to some extent Eastern society, that's exactly where you need to be. Because think of it, the Greeks come by and they completely take over that entire area where all of those roads lead, right? Yeah. And they make them speak Greek. And then a couple hundred years later, the Romans come by and they build roads everywhere. I mean, like everywhere. Roman roads were famous. I mean, there's still Roman roads like in England, that like they're just engineered so well. And then Jesus comes along. So you got everybody speaking the same language. You've got a network that you can get to everybody. Jesus comes, sets on fire 12 people who go, 11 people, and then goes on to spread it throughout the world. There's no way you don't get to all that without first occupying this area. Why do you think God was so fixated on making sure that, well, what Abraham was, he was in Ur, he was in Haran, and he has to go 1,300 miles up to where Canaan is. Why Canaan? Canaan is exactly where you need to be in order to influence the world. It's where we get, okay, so how did Christianity take off? Because where they were was at the complete, like, ground zero of communications and transportation and everything for the ancient world. So that's the way I look at it, is that at some point, and I wonder, okay, this is like conspiracy theory, whatever, but I wonder in
we
some
need to play
way,
a little special music right here. Conspiracy Corner with John.
Here we go. Ding, ding, ding. No, I wonder if on some, is there a spiritual thing going on there? Is there a spiritual battle in which maybe the forces of darkness, maybe there's some kind of satanic thing? And I'm not like, Satan's behind every bush, like my washing machine didn't work this morning. It must be Satan after me. Like I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that perhaps there's stuff that we don't see. And perhaps that's something where, like, maybe Satan was kind of like, all right, I'm just going to put these people in here. I'm going to block your plan. And God's like, nah, that plan can't be blocked. We've got to have this area here. And it's funny how over and over again we see in the Old Testament where he's like, I have seen the sins of so-and-so. I've seen the sins of these people group, and their sins cry out to heaven to me. And have there been times like Jonah where it's like, I'm going to send you out and I'm going to tell them to repent. And if they don't repent, then I'm just going to have to do this, because he saw the coming of Jesus, because he saw all those developments.
Wow. That's cool. I like that perspective.
Perhaps.
And I like the conspiracy corner. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. But I mean, perhaps. All of this is perhaps. We don't know.
Yeah. But it also, when you started saying that, it made me think of almost like, you think of the Bible as a story, right? It's almost like the Old Testament was a different part of this full story, right? Because when Jesus came, it wasn't necessarily meant to be a copy paste of what God was doing in the Old Testament when Jesus was there in the New Testament. And so you're going to see something different because it's a one big story, not just the same thing the whole way through. And
yeah, I mean, I think when you mentioned that, first thing I think of is when I try to talk to my wife and my daughter. I mean, I'm talking with them, everything's fine and everything, but sometimes they're just going back and forth like, what about this and what about this? And it's like this electrostatic connection, something. It's like a back and forth. And I'm like, well, I'm at the dinner table, so I'll just, well, that's funny. What about, and they'll look at me like, just keep up. Okay. Like I didn't get something in there. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, because they said that, no, that was before then. And so like, I got half the story, right? So if you have half the story, you have none of the story. And so I
Yeah.
think in some ways, when people try to make sense of God and they only look at the Old Testament, this isn't like the Bible. The Bible is not like a manual on God and who he is in his essence at his core. You know, like it's not, because I mean, that would have to be a much bigger book and maybe it's much more experiential. What it is, it's a story of God's interaction with a family, Abraham. And then Abraham has sons and sons and sons and sons, and it goes all the way down to Israel. And then, you know, Jesus is in that lineage and it just goes on. So basically it's one family's interaction with the God of the universe and what happens as a result and how he plans to bless the world through this one family and create a nation out of it, right? So in that, we know that there's a story that's unveiling. You know, it's progressing. So it's progressive revelation. You know, it's not a snapshot of exactly what everything is. So we get a progressive, revealed idea of what's going on. So, I mean, the next tangible question, the best question is, I mean, are you guys Marvel guys?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Dude, come on.
So tell me, I mean, what's your favorite Marvel movie?
Well, Iron Man.
Oh yeah.
I love
dude.
the Iron Man movies,
No,
man. Like
dude.
nothing tops it.
So good. Endgame for sure, dude.
Yeah.
Magnifique.
Iron Man was at least Endgame. So
It was,
I'll
dude.
take it.
Tell
It
me,
was his moment.
tell me
Full
he
circle.
doesn't look like what's his face? You look like Captain America. Have people told you
Oh,
that?
Yo, let's
don't do
go.
that because
Am I right?
it's
A
not,
little bit
it's not
of
here
Chris Evans
or
over
here.
here.
Chris Evans. That's what.
Let's go.
I have to stuff my shirts a little bit just to try to match it
Oh,
up.
who cares about that? But have people told you that?
I
Oh, come on.
I haven't
you
heard
got like
Captain
that beard.
America.
You got like the Infinity War beard right now, too.
That's true. That is what. That's
All
what
you
I'm,
gotta
that's what I'm
all you
going
gotta
for.
do is you gotta go. I can do this all day.
I need to get a shield just that I carry
we
around
could
with
do
me. Yeah.
We can do that.
I would say that though. You definitely got the Chris Evans look. You like Endgame,
Oh yeah.
and you know a bunch about it, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Are you like a buff, a movie
See,
buff?
Endgame gave me a real deep appreciation for like story arc.
Yeah.
In a whole new way.
Yeah.
And I think what movies have done lately better is given backstory even to antagonists.
Yeah.
Where I don't know if we always got that. Sometimes I even think
Yeah,
when
it's like-
when Star Wars first came out, we eventually got more backstory on Darth
Yeah.
Vader. But at
Yeah,
first
we-
it was like
the
We
big
talked
bad,
about
yeah.
this. We said the new Star Wars with Disney is just like.
Oh no, it's yeah.
we got
it's
real
hard to
upset
watch.
about that.
It is hard to watch.
But you didn't know.
Let it be known. After Endgame is when Marvel started to like
Yeah.
go down a little
It
bit.
did. They did
Because it's so
well.
good. Because it's so good.
Yeah.
You knew it had to happen.
Yeah.
They just tried to keep it all going, and it's kind of falling apart. But Endgame, masterpiece in story arc, because Thanos, if you choose to try to understand Thanos' arc, I mean, it makes sense. That first half of the two, right? Thanos has a belief that the world needs to be.
It's Thanos. It's Thanos. Thanos. You
I'm
gotta
saying
be
Thanos.
appropriate.
It's Thanos. straight up.
People look at me like, "What are you talking about?" The Greek is Thanos, but I understand. Yeah. So Thanos.
Anyway, so I'm getting too deep into it.
Tell
but the
Kevin
story,
Feige.
story arcs, right? And so there's one story arc in half of it,
Mm.
which kind of tells Thanos is successful.
Yeah.
And he believes at his core that is what he is called to do. And so you can almost see it. I get it.
Right.
He's so convinced of this.
Right.
But when you put then the next film, it actually shows the full story arc. Like there was a whole story that was not yet unfolded. Had you stopped at the first half, you only get that little bit of it.
Well, it's
Yeah.
chaos. It's death. Aren't people like disappearing? It look,
yeah.
They're just kind of
Yeah.
like
it
evaporating.
ends with
I
him
got a
disappearing.
text from my mom after Infinity War. It was like, "Hi, I need to talk about the fate of the Marvel universe." Like it like wrecked people, right?
Yeah.
You're like, watch these characters for 15 years and then
And it's like a
they're
3-hour
gone.
movie.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was on a long plane ride just recently. I came back. Actually, when I was going out, I watched Infinity War.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's cool. I knew we were going to be talking about stuff like this. So I was like, I'm going to watch Infinity War.
Mm.
And on the way back, I'll watch Endgame. They changed the lineup. So I couldn't watch Endgame on the way back.
Oh,
I was so mad. I was like, I'm so
Unresolved.
ready for the
Wasn't there? That's
resolution.
horrible.
But see, this is exactly what I'm talking about, though. So when people talk about God, and when you talk about the Old Testament, they talk about, well, you know, the God of justice, and he's just angry and whatever. It's like only watching Infinity War. It's like saying there's chaos, there's death, everything doesn't resolve. It's horrible. It's all over. But then you've got Infinity War, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Endgame.
Endgame,
So in Endgame, what happens in Endgame? Tony Stark sacrifices himself.
Spoiler alert, by the way.
Yeah, right. The same Tony Stark at the beginning, who was all about himself,
Mhm.
who was everything's just about him, and he used people, he did all this stuff. At the end, he actually gives himself up for the greater good. Yeah, that's a great story. So, like, which is it?
Mm.
Which is which? Is it a good story or a bad story? You know, is it something that ends in destruction or is it end in goodness? And I think that's kind of what we're talking about with Old Testament, New Testament. You got to take the entire arc of who God is.
That's good. I mean, I think that makes sense that if I were to just look at the Old Testament and then draw conclusions about God, then look at the New Testament as its own separate thing, not as part of one big story.
Okay, so here's something. Is going to be trippy. So in the Old Testament, what does it set up? It sets up justice, law, right? God sometimes comes across as pretty angry, and in some ways just like violent. Against what? What's he violent against?
Like it's sin.
Yeah, he's not violent against people or like that person. I hate that person or anything like that. He hates sin. Shoot, what was it? C.S. Lewis. I can't remember exactly how he says it, but he's like, it's not. He doesn't come. He's not. It's not cranky explosiveness directed at a person. It's not cruel, but it's hatred of sin, which is it's destroying everything he created, everything he loves, us. It's destroying us. Like I went to a conference recently. It was a cross conference back in January, and they're like, "We just got to let you know, sin is killing you." And like when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, slap in the face! Your sin is literally killing you." And I was like, "Wow, I never thought of it that way. Like that's so true." And so, if God lives in that universe of seeing that every day, sin is killing the person I love. What's he going to do? So here's the trippy thing. He sets up a system of justice and holiness and righteousness, that he is the God of the universe who is righteous and holy, and everything that is sinful and wicked and evil gets destroyed in his sight, right? So he sets that up so that when he comes as Jesus, he can climb up on that altar and be sacrificed. So the justice that he sets up is the same justice that he bleeds by.
Yeah. Wow.
That's nuts.
Wow. He was willing to play, like, it's so interesting because he was willing to play by the same game. Like he said, hey, if I'm going to take the sin.
He wasn't playing by the same game. He took it more seriously than we did.
It's good.
Think of that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, I mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I mean,
like,
I didn't know how to say it right, but I think it's just he because he took our sin upon himself.
Right.
He said, this is what has to happen.
Yeah.
And like that's
so in setting up that like, whoa, God, holy, he just slays anything in his path that's evil. And then he takes all evilness upon himself, all of our sin upon himself, and bleeds for it. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you see the whole picture, it's like, okay. I understand now.
So that's very helpful. And it's reminding us to look at the whole scope, to read further, right? Don't read headlines, like you're saying, and get a little bit further into the story to try to understand context. And so I still think there's probably just a couple isolated, verses and incidents that's worth just leaning into a little bit and asking, like, hey, what was going on there? Like, how do we look at this? Because I could see God enacting wrath and judgment on sinful, wicked people that have been given tons of opportunity. But what about, children, firstborns, right? I think about Exodus when they have the Passover, the angel, comes through through Egypt and strikes down all the firstborn sons in Egypt. Those are tough because, again, now you're talking about legitimate innocence, like these, I know we're all sinful, right? All sinful people, but they haven't yet done stuff or had the opportunity to turn to God or to find God. And so is there some bigger picture that we have to look at? Do we just have to ignore that? Or how do we grapple?
I have a friend who has lost a couple children, and it's devastating to lose a child and to lose two of them. And the way he talks about this verse or these verses, he's like, I have a hard time with that. I don't understand it. And that's probably one of the most respectful ways you can handle it is just, I don't understand it, but I still choose to trust.
You got a full answer there, Josh?
No, I mean, that's probably the same boat I put myself even in as I read those. It's like, and maybe I just haven't read enough, right?
Yeah.
Looked at the headlines too much, but to give you an answer that I'm like, well, this is why. It's like, no, I'm probably mid wrestle with that one, where it's like, I don't know enough to be like, hey, this is exactly why. Like, it's like, yeah, Pharaoh had a ton of opportunities to let the people go, but like, even in that concept, there's still that wrestle of like, well, it wasn't their fault. Like, those were his decisions. And so, yeah, I don't have like a textbook answer for this one. I'm mid wrestle with this.
Well, it's almost like if you're sitting in a room and you got a couple people that come in and they say to you, the first person says, well, this is how I'm going to deal with this issue. I'm going to deal with this problem. And it's something, you think, okay, well, that's cool. That's a good way to do it. Second person's like, yeah, I'd handle it this way. And maybe that's something you're not totally agreeing with. And then the third person comes in and they say, well, I would handle it this way. And you're like, oh, I like what they're saying, but I don't like how they achieve it, how they're doing this. The question is, like, how would you decide who to go with? Who would you decide with? You'd probably decide with, well, I guess the one I agree with the most. But how do you know that's the right way? And especially if you're just sitting in a room, 3 people come in, you have no idea what these people are, right? What would you need to know more of? So I think a lot of this we can boil down to just a simple analogy here. Imagine you're sitting in a room somewhere and you're thinking to yourself, man, I'm lonely. I want to have a wife someday. I want to figure out how to do this. So you figure out some way to get 3 experts to come in and tell you, how can you find a woman? How can you get married? How can you have a successful life? All the rest of it, right? So first person gives you their pitch. This is how you do it, ABC, whatever. And you listen to it and you're like, oh, I like that. That sounds really good. Middle person, like, well, I think da-da-da-da. And, because this is what you should do, ABC, D, E, F, whatever. And you're kind of like, well, kind of like some of that. I'm not sure about the rest of it, but yeah, that sounds interesting. Third one comes in, says something that's kind of like, whoa, that's really good. Like and then the second half of what they're saying, like, first you do this, and then you got to do da-da-da. And you're like, whoa, not so sure about that. That sounds horrible. So listening to those things, obviously you would probably go with the first person, but you don't know anything about them. And so part of you would be like, well, can I get some more information? Like, so person number 1, what's your marriage like? Yeah. Person number 2, what's your marriage like? Person number 3, what's your marriage like? And as you learn more about who they are, you actually find out the third person is the one who's probably the most stand-up person. So you'd want to know more about the character of the person.
And sometimes the advice you might get, if we're sticking with marriage, like someone who's really wise and has been through it with marriage, they might have wisdom that you don't like, or that you actually resist, or you're like, that didn't sound fun. But then you learn the guy who everything sounded great is 6 months into his marriage. And everything is easy right now. And then the guy who's 25, 30 years into his marriage, you're realizing like, oh, wow, you know enough to actually caution now on the things I should be thinking of. And so like maybe that's why that context and that person, their experience, their track record is really important.
So there's a difference, I think, within contemporary Christianity between consumer Christianity and character Christianity. So in consumer Christianity, it's all about like what God can do for you. Like what can he achieve for me? And the problem is with consumer Christianity, because you're so focused on what can this do for me, when you come across texts like the Old Testament that it disagrees fundamentally with what you think is right or wrong or whatever, that's a flash. That's like a red flag going like, I don't know if I can follow this. Because if it's going to take me down a road of something I disagree with or something that's not good for me, then I can't follow it anymore. Character Christianity, though, that says, I'm going to follow God because I know he is good. I know he's holy. And I know sometimes that's going to be bumpy. A great example of this comes from chapter 8 of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, where, and some people have talked about this, we're probably recognize it. Susan is asking about Aslan. So in this book, Aslan is a lion. He represents Jesus, and he's the one who comes to take care of evil. And in his in his campaign to take care of evil, he's got to really deal with the witch, who's the symbol of evil. He's got to do some horrible things to her in the end. But initially, as Mr. Beaver is talking to Susan, he's saying, yeah, Aslan's on the move. Aslan's coming. Everything's going to be great. She's like, oh, he sounds wonderful. Tell me more about him. Tells a little bit more about him. Susan goes, well, so is he a tame lion? Because all the lions I've seen are wild. They'll chop your head off. And he goes, oh, no, Susan. He's not tame. He's not a tame lion, but he's good. And see, that's what I'm getting at between consumer and character Christianity, is that we've got to, at some point, get to the point where we say, okay, so God doesn't operate all the time in a way I think he should.
Yeah. And it sounds like, because we often will look at scripture,
right,
and we'll try to input ourselves into it.
Right.
And we'll say like, this is, I'm looking for how it fits with the way I view life.
I don't feel good about this.
Yeah. Like this is like my ideology has to fit in Scripture
Mhm.
instead of looking at it and saying, "Oh man, it's actually not a story about me.
Yeah.
I'm not the hero of this."
Yeah. What was that
story."
thing you were telling about how someone was reading it and then they had to read it again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I heard Tara Lee Cobble, who writes some incredible Bible
recap.
studies. Dude, she writes some incredible stuff. She shared about reading through like she had not read through the Bible for most of her upbringing.
Right.
She's like, I'm kind of ashamed of that. It's
Right.
part of it. She's like, I was on staff at a church and I
Yeah.
realized I hadn't read through the Bible. And she said that her mentor said, hey, go ahead and just read all the way through. She reads all the way through and she's like, I did not like the God that I read. I didn't like him. And so she just was like, this is not good. And she went back to her mentor and said, I read through the whole Bible. I don't like God. And he told her, he said, hey, now I want you to go back. I want you to read through the Bible again. I want you to stop looking for yourself. And I want you to start looking for God. And it was just this profound switch. And she said she read through it and it was amazing when you stop looking for yourself in everything. How do I fit in this? What do I think about this? And you just look at it and say, this is God's story. It's a story about God, my creator. It's telling me reality.
Yeah.
I'm not telling it reality.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
That's a huge difference because we forget that the word God means that God defines himself. We don't. And we're used to shaping things.
Yeah.
We tailor things, everything. You know, you personalize your phone. You do all these things that make everything all about you. And again, so much of our conversations have been about context and our cultural context, friend. We're so used to shaping everything and contextualizing everything just for us and for our ease and what fits us. That's why this idea of following a God who operates in a manner sometimes that makes us feel unsafe. It's like, whoa, I'm not going to do that because this won't advance where I want to go with this. C.S. Lewis in The Problem of Pain, he says in a different way, this whole consumer idea, he says that oftentimes when we think of God, we picture God not as our father, which sometimes our father can do things that make us go, whoa, wait a second, what? Yeah. We picture him as a grandfather. And grandfathers are all about you know, everybody here, I got some licorice for you. I got those like nasty butterscotch things, you know. But those butterscotch things, you know, it doesn't even have a wrapper on it. That's nasty. So, but yeah, the whole idea there is, and he quotes it like this, he goes, at the end of the day, a good time was had by all, you know. And so that is kind of this beneficent type of gray bearded man in the sky that just wants everybody happy. But a father has to step up sometimes and has to be like, hey, no, we're not going to do that. I remember when I was a kid, my dad, you know, when your dad's home for dinner and like your mom is out doing something and he has to make dinner and how different it is.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like when mom's home and dad's home, dinner's awesome. Everything's great. Your dad's just kind of following orders, you know, and like whatever. But when dad's home, everything's kind of like, oh, okay, we're going to have eggs and corn.
TV dinners, frozen dinners.
Frozen pizza again.
Oh, yeah.
I wish. Sometimes it's awesome.
I wish we had frozen pizza. I'm serious. He would make corn omelets.
What?
Totally serious. He would seriously make, he would scramble up eggs and put corn in.
Why didn't you just do eggs?
I don't know.
At what point you're like, the corn is better?
You knew when dad was running dinner, it was corn omelets. And you're like, why? He's like, that's all he knew?
Yeah, that's all he knew.
Is that what they did in the military? You know,
I didn't do that, bro.
My dad used to dump a bunch of different types of soup and whatever leftover meat we had in one big pot. If mom was gone for like a week, I kid you not, one big pot. He'd dump it all in, stir it up, and that was dinner for literally the next several days.
The equivalent of the like soda fountain, and you're just like the machine.
Yeah.
And you're just like,
I'll
do a little bit. Yeah, I'll do a little bit of Sprite, a little bit of Diet Coke.
It was like prison.
Soup.
It was prison. You'd walk by with your plate, and he'd be like, "Here you go." He loved it. It was like I don't know why he liked that so much, but we were like, "Dad, I have no idea what you just put in this thing." Weird concoction.
So my dad, I remember this one time, my mom's gone. My dad, you know, like I came back from playing with everybody because, you know, back then you just played outside and we came back inside and I was like, oh man, I'm almost late for dinner. And he was late with making his corn omelet. So I noticed that he was late. So I was like, oh, okay, is dinner going to be a little bit later? He's like, a little bit, but you could tell like he was reaching his max, you know? And I was like, okay, well, I'll be back. I'm going to go out with Josh again. And he goes, no. And pure dad fashion. I'm like, what? And he goes, we got to stick together. I'm like, what?
War?
Did something just happen? You know, it's like we're a family. We're going to eat dinner together. I was like, okay. But there were many times where as a dad, he just did stuff that was like, and now listen, I'm not saying it's the equivalent of God telling people to go smite people.
Sure.
But in the grand scheme of things, we have to remember that the same Father that we see in God, Jesus says, if you've seen the Father, you've seen me.
Yeah.
And so there are parts of God and Jesus that, you know, as we think of them as one God, if we trust his character, if that guy, you know, we got the 3 people in the room and we're choosing the person that has the best character, we don't choose the person that has the thing that we agree with the most. Oh, that's awesome. That's easy. I'm going to pick that guy. No, we want to find, after we've searched this person's character, oh, this guy's had the longest track record. This guy has the most honest. This guy has the best. Okay, I'm going to go with him. Even if I don't agree with all of his plan, I trust him because of character. And so I think that's what we've got to do long term is that Miroslav Volf said, only a God of wrath can defeat or stop real evil. Now think about that for a minute. Like only a God of wrath can stop real evil. And this is a guy who comes from a war-torn area. He's seen a lot of pain. And so this isn't coming from some glib guy that's never encountered anything difficult. Miroslav Volf's going through a lot. But he's talking about, from what he's seen, a God of wrath will eventually get rid of evil so that we never have to deal with it ever again. And sometimes that appears to us as savage.
Yeah. And you share something too. We were talking about faith, and it's like, man, I think sometimes we fall into a faith, and it's like we want to be efficient but not effective. And so it's like, I want the faith that I don't have as many bumps or not as many wrestles. But I think we'd all agree, like looking at our own faith journey, and probably many of you listening, that on the other side of the wrestle, the effectiveness of like, man, I'm closer to God is worth that wrestle. And so like, he's not giving us
that line again, to be efficient.
We want efficiency. We don't want effectiveness in our faith. It's like, I want, you know, no bumps in the road and no wrestles, but God's like, dude, you need like all the bumps in the road and the wrestles.
Yeah.
And even just relationally, like just shamelessly being a dude, right? Like had a little stint where it was like I was doing jujitsu and MMA and stuff. And it's like, dude, the closest you would get from the guys when it went like just above a friendly spar, where you're like, okay, we hit each other in the face like as hard as we could a little bit, but like the hug after the bell rang was legit. Like I have like some pictures of even people capturing the hug, and it's like you don't get that little moment if you don't have the moment where like that like really hurt, and I didn't like that feeling. But like I know more about myself and the other person on the other side.
Dude, I think about that all the time. I mean, I do. Like I think to myself, I need to take some shots in the head. You know what I mean? Just in case anything were to ever happen.
You gotta be ready.
Like, wait, what just happened? You know, like,
just pay somebody.
Is that the
like,
dumbest thing?
Pay somebody. Hey, anytime today, I need you to just attack me so I'm ready.
Serious, man.
What was that movie where the guy would always hide and try to ambush
dude.
the panther?
Yeah,
the Pink Panther.
Dude. Yeah. His name is Kato. Yeah. But no, honestly, I will like sometimes when no one else is around, I'll do like a barrel roll or like a front somersault just to feel like, okay, like
I still got it.
I can do this.
If I had to.
If I had to like duck bullets, I can do it. It's the dumbest thing. But I totally, I'm tracking what you're saying.
Yeah.
But see, I think what you're saying too, not to have too many alliterative type of things here, but when I think of this whole topic, I think this can either be a fence post for me that just tells me like, nope, not going. You know, like do not enter. I can't go one step further. Or it can be a filter. And so the filter then says, okay, I'm going to have to pass what I have as assumptions about who God should be and what truth is and what reality is. And it's going to have to pass through this filter of the Word of God and God's character so that what comes on the other side strains out my personal thoughts about what should be or shouldn't be because I'm not God.
Yeah.
And so I've got to let God strain that out. So I don't want this issue to be a fence post for me. I don't want this to be like, can't go any further. I want it to be a filter. And filters are tough. You know, you're going to leave some stuff behind. And so I think majority case here is that we've really got to understand, I think big idea from this is that when you only know half the story, you don't have the whole truth. And so if you're only looking at the Old Testament and you're saying like, what's up with that? You've got to read it in balance with the New Testament of like the very same God of wrath suffered the God of wrath for us.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so which is it? It's all the same.
Yeah.
So you can trust the character of that God, even when it feels like that's hard to do. And it's my friend who lost a couple kids. He's not like, I'm cool with it. I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care anymore. No,
Yeah.
he still cares, but he chooses to trust.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I've never heard it said quite so succinctly in that
Mhm,
way, where maybe see that phrase again, that the God of the same God of wrath, the God of wrath suffered the God of wrath. How did you
Yeah.
say that?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
It
Play
sounded
it
great.
back.
It was tweetable.
Yeah.
But
It was
But the
good.
concept, of like, man, God doesn't. None of us here experience something or that God didn't Himself go through. Like He went through
Yeah.
His own wrath. Like what an unreal concept.
Yeah.
I know.
Like
know. And
you
he
can't
didn't
point
just-
at Him and be like, oh, you don't have to put up with it. It's like
See, this
He
is the
took
thing.
the brunt
He's
of it.
not. He's
Yeah.
not Rex Kwon Do. You know, he's not just like I can do it. Look, I can even do it to myself.
Forget about it.
Like that's forget it. That's great. Do that again. That was
Forget about it.
That was perfect. What I'm trying to say is God is not saying, I go home to Starla. He's not that person. I can do this. It's more like, I choose to do this for you. And that's the thing that we've got to say, okay, I'm going to hold on to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to hold on as strongly to this over here because I'm going to choose in the end. See, this is what I think. I think we're going to go to heaven someday and we're going to, I don't know. I imagine myself like walking across like a field or a plane or something like that, and like it hits me like here, and I'm gonna be struck with humility. You know, struck with like I don't deserve to be here. You know, it's because of what Jesus. And then all of a sudden, I feel I don't know. I could be totally wrong about this. In the same way, we take like 6 months to a year to kind of like figure out like when we're babies. You know, like what color is, what distances are, who's what. I think it's gonna be a wear-in period in heaven, where it's slowly gonna hit us like, oh, so that's why all of that happened, you know, and I think this issue is going to be that kind of thing. We're not going to know everything. We're not going to be able to fly everywhere. We're not going to be gods in heaven. We're going to slowly come to the realization of like, whoa. So that made a whole lot of sense. Like the way God did it, it was all about love.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about sacrifice. It was all about giving Himself. He surrendered Himself for us. And so we got to hold on to that. That's what I think.
We covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And this is because it's a big topic, and I'm sure we missed a bunch of stuff. I'm sure there's still lingering questions for you as well. But we're really trying to capture that when it comes to the Old Testament, there's a lot of context that we're really missing. And we're kind of putting our own lens over the Old Testament. And sometimes when we do that, we're only seeing what we want to see. And at the end of the day, God is telling us who He is. It's God's story. It's not for us to decide that. And that's hard.
Yeah, it is.
Because we have our own view of how God should be, what feels fair, what feels just to us.
Well, yeah, and it might fundamentally say, I can't go any further with this God because I disagree with this particular point. And that's where you really got to ask, like, is this worship of God, or is this something that a God that fits within your parameters?
Yeah. And so there's going to be stuff that we are just going to wrestle with in the Old Testament. It's just going to be hard, and we're not going to have a perfect answer, a perfect bow that we can put on it. And we want that. I would love to have that.
Yeah.
But there's stuff that just, it just feels.
And sometimes people do that, and it's wrong. You know, where they're like, "Oh, it's easy. This is how we answer it."
Yeah.
And I hope nobody's feeling like we're coming to that. You know, like none of us are saying, "Well, it's simple. Just move on." You know.
Yeah. So I think it's good to know. We're not just saying move on. It's not important. But we are saying that sometimes we're also not looking at the whole story. You know, when we think about Avengers Endgame, Wicked. I mean, that's true. If you only watch that first act, that first half of that 1-2-part movie, you are going to get the wrong picture of who God is.
Right.
And you're going to start drawing conclusions you shouldn't draw.
Yeah.
And then once you put all of it together, it just starts to make more sense. And you get to an ending that gives you a better, more fuller picture of God. Not two different gods, just one big, fuller picture of who God really is.
Yep. And we got there with mentioning Rex Kwon Do. So you
And Rex Kwon Do got in there.
Key part to it.
So that we could sit on this for a long, long time, but I feel like we hit a lot of those markers along the way for this. So we talked about God's character, you know, who He is, how we kind of try to look into that, the Bible, all this stuff. But now we kind of want to know, there's so many brands of Christianity out there, right? There's so many denominations, ways to interpret the Bible, ways to use the Bible. And I want to know, how do I know if I have the right view of Christianity?
Right.
How would I know if I'm in a cult? Would I know if I'm in a cult?
That'd be interesting.
And we need to pick that apart to know what's the most important stuff, what's the right view of Christianity. And we're getting into that in our next episode.
This is, at first, to me, like terrifying to think that there's 41,000 different denominations. I'm like, what is going on? Like, why aren't we on the same page about this?
Within the Catholic Church, there's additional books. How does that work?
Because this is something that has really led to, in my past, almost a crisis in my faith, that all of these religions seem so similar. And I'm like, why is that? Like, if there's a supreme God who's all powerful, why would he allow all these like counterfeits?
Vaughn, what about Jehovah's Witnesses? You
Yeah.
mentioned them.
I love talking theology, okay? And my wife can't stand this. You know, the Jehovah's Witnesses show up at our door, and I'm like, oh, let's talk.
You found a personal relationship with Jesus, and you
Yeah.
were like, well, I need to seek truth.
Yeah.
And you ended up basically like reading the handbook of a cult.
Yes.